Hi and welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me. So today is this is one of those videos I've looked forward to for quite a long time, and spoiler alert, didn't quite work out as I was anticipating, but did lead on to further investigations which I will bring into the second part of this video because I think it's interesting and it's definitely relevant. So here we are. The main subject is Crosby Stills Nash, self-titled first album. This is the new Analogue Productions 75th anniversary double 45 all analog edition, which is one of these Atlantic 75s that I've been looking forward to hugely because it really is one of my all-time favorite albums. It's a stunning album. Now, regular viewers will know I've done a whole video on this before, and I'll put a link up here. And this was when I reviewed the Mobile Fidelity one-step version of this album. And so just spoiler alerts and all the rest of it. Basically, my conclusion there was I preferred the original pressing, but the MoFi had some very positive qualities. It was very clean. It was very spacious, almost a bit forensic. Now, to be perfectly honest, I don't have the MoFi anymore. A friend of mine visited not so long ago, and he's a bit of a fan of the MoFi one steps, and he made me an offer on my one step of this, and I accepted it. So he bought that. So what I've got here are the 3 copies that I had last time. So what we have here in the middle, this is my UK original, and I'll just show you the label of that so that you can just refresh your memory. So this is a UK original, which is on the plum and red Atlantic label, and it sounds very fine indeed. Okay, there for now. This is my kind of second copy. This is a Classic Records reissue from, I think, 2002, if I'm not mistaken, and all very nice. Okay, and then of course what we've got here is the brand new Analogue Productions 2x 45 RPM edition, which I believe is a repress of Classic Records plates made back in the day, I guess. Although, what does it say? It's got Bernie Grundman's signature on it anyway. But yeah, this is a 45 RPM, and I do believe this is a, like I said, a repressing from Classic Records plates, because Analogue Productions bought Classic Records. So that's what we've got here. Now, you'll have seen several other Atlantic 75 reviews on this channel, from the Charles Mingus, Phil Collins Face Value, Genesis Selling England, the Genesis Lamb Lies Down, the Bad Company, and they've been absolute hits. I mean, just stunning. So my expectations for this were high, and I was, mildly disappointed. Now, I want to get that in context. It still, in my opinion, blows away this 2002 Classic Records. I haven't got the MoFi here to do an A/B demo, but I've got a pretty good memory of how that fitted in alongside these two, and this one is a lot closer to the original in my mind than the Classic Records, and of course this is than the MoFi, and this one is all analog, of course. So I think it is it's a very close, but there's a fundamental difference which is apparent on this one, and it's also on the 2002 33 RPM classic records. And that basically is that there's more bass. They've just EQ'd the bass up. And I mean, that same thing, that same trait, if you like, would apply to those Genesis records without doubt. You can probably remember me talking about Mike Rutherford's bass and how you can hear it so clearly and really enjoy it. And the bass pedals are just cosmic on both of the Genesis albums I've listened to so far. And the bass on here is a similar thing. It's kind of, it's just bigger, right? Now, you know, Genesis is prog, and this isn't prog. This is something quite different. It's kind of country, psychedelic, folk rock, if you like. And if there's an overriding quality about the music on all of these songs, it's a bouncy, joyful, sunshiny. You know, this is West Coast, you know, California, 68, 69. There's sunshine, you know, it's warm, it's, you know, we just had the summer of love. Everyone's happy, everyone's feeling, you know, free and easy, man, you know, very much a kind of hippie vibe. And the album just has a bounce and a light and a joy to it. And for me, that just hangs out more on the original. And I think this is just down to a mastering choice. And so I think on this one, I've just quite simply got to blame Bernie Grundman there. I just don't think he judged it quite right. For me, increasing the level of bass, and it's sort of on a lot of the tracks, it's kind of like an umpire bass. You've got these, you know, you think about Marrakesh Express, it's like, you know, and that kind of umpire-y kind of bass, if you just increase its size, if you like, you know, just EQ it up in the mix, it's sort of, you know, it's a big fat thing. If you decrease it, it's just like boom, 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 boom. You know, it just becomes lighter and more fun. And I think that's really where the original scores for me over this. But it was this led me on to after being in discussion with someone else about VTA, basically, vertical tracking angle, and it led me on to a bit of an investigation, which is something I kind of avoid because, frankly, adjusting the VTA on my particular setup I've got is a complete and utter pain in the arse. But that's what I want to run through now. So the supposition was that maybe the fact that this sounds a little bit sort of veiled in the top and fat in the bass, and that the what did I write in the notes? Okay, so bass fat, vocals veiled, tempo just stodgy. And also, the other thing, which I think is the really kind of critical thing, is it didn't feel as three-dimensional. Whereas the original, the bass was tighter, smaller, less, the vocals were livelier, and the space was more defined. You know, at the beginning of Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, you've got Crosby and Nash singing kind of quite close into the mic, you know, and then Stills comes in, you know, and you make it hard, and it's very separate. They're singing into the same mic, but you can feel the different position of his voice relative to the microphone, and that was more defined on the original. Now that's something I would equate with the VTA being spot on. Now, I set my VTA at a kind of an average level, which I'll always use a quite often an Atlantic or something like that. But of the sort of from the period of say 68 to 72, 73 maybe, and I'll use a record from about that time, and they typically weigh about 160 grams. And I actually measured using these digital calipers, which are kind of essential really for turntable setup in a way. But I measured the thickness of this Atlantic 75 and I measured the thickness of the original. The original measured 2.09 millimeters thick, and the Atlantic 75 2.39 millimeters thick. So there's 0.3 of a millimeter, third of a millimeter, call it, thicker here. Now, if the records were cut with the same cutting angle, Stylus Rake Angle, vertical tracking angle, they're all kind of tied in. If I can just use this as a very makeshift prop, if you imagine that's the stylus and that's a cantilever of a cartridge, the Stylus Rake Angle is typically, well, let me open that up a little bit, right? So if you imagine that gap is actually the edge of the stylus that touches the record, so to speak, because it's elliptical, sort of in that plane. So if you imagine that's the point on the extremity, and this is kind of like the fatness, the front of the stylus, the back of the stylus, but this slot represents the point at which it's touching the record surface, the groove. And then this here is the cantilever. So typically VTA people measure and refer to this angle here, and the Stylus Rake Angle, I think they'll typically measure this angle here from vertical. Okay, now it's, I forget the actual number, but I think it's about 92 degrees or something. So basically that would be 90 degrees, the Stylus Rake Angle, where the contact line of the stylus is at 90 degrees to the groove. So it's actually slightly tilting forwards by a couple of degrees, okay? And as you raise and lower the tone arm height, now if you imagine my elbow is the arm pillar and pivot, so as I'm going up and down there, you're changing both this angle here, which is the critical one at the end of the day. It's the one that, that's the one that positions the stylus in the groove. But this one here, I mean, it's typically 90 degrees to that, because a stylus is normally glued on perpendicular to the cantilever, but, and therefore you can measure that because it's a lot easier to see it. But it is, the thing that's really mattering is here. So by raising and lowering the arm, we alter that. Now, if you think, okay, I'm raising with the thicker Atlantic 75, I'm raising this by 0.3 of a mil. So in effect, you've lowered the back of the arm by 0.3 of a mil. It might not seem like much, but believe me, you can hear it. So anyway, I kind of thought, right, okay, let's just, rather than just guessing here, let's reset the VTA for this, okay, for the Atlantic 75. So I raised, and I've got various tools for doing this. First thing is you need to make sure you've got the stylus pressure set right, because if I go back to this here, right, if that's in a fixed position, right, the record's on any record of now. If I increase the stylus pressure, that pushes down here, right, and you can see what's happening to the arm, to the angle in the groove. So if I increase the mass there, it pivots down there, but this pivots up and this flattens out, okay? Conversely, if I lower the stylus pressure level, right, it goes, such and so forth. So you've got to have various constants in order to measure and listen to this. So the first thing is make sure your stylus pressure is set correctly. On my Miyajima Kansui, that's 2.3 grams, although I'll vary it by half a gram by ear, but actually around 2.3 is the critical thing there. And actually what that's doing is, if you imagine, if you imagine my fist is the cartridge body, cantilever here, my arm is the tone arm. Inside here are coils and magnets. Now, it's kind of important that the coils are in the middle of the magnet gap when we're kind of at a null point, if you like. Obviously the stylus will wiggle forwards and backwards and up and down, but when it's in that middle point, it really wants to be in the middle of the magnet gap. The coil wants to be in the middle of a magnet gap on a moving coil cartridge, and the converse on a moving magnet cartridge. So that's really what your tracking force you're trying to do is with the tracking force is you're trying to position those coils optimally within the magnetic gap, and doing that will increase the dynamic range and sort of linearity of the performance. So that's why never stray too far from what the manufacturer recommends. So bear that one in mind. Anyway, back to this whole thing of doing the vertical tracking angle. So I use this to measure. I'll insert a photograph between sort of armrest and arm board, and I came up with it was about 18.5 millimeters as it was, which is my my current setup, which I've just been running with for years, frankly. I also have this device here, which is a very cool little device, and this is if I put you kind of need to use it with a business card, because you put a business card behind it and you can see you've got a grid. Now the idea is you'd sit that on the record behind your cartridge and head shell. I'll insert another picture here, and you can see how the head shell is sitting relative to the lines on this block, and that's really, really useful. And then other things are, I've got this very, very tiny little bubble level, which is so light. In fact, let's see how much it weighs. It's 1/4 of a gram, okay, less than 0.23 of a gram. So it's so light that it doesn't have an appreciable effect on the, if you're trying to measure this angle here using a spirit level, and you put something big and heavy on it, like a bigger spirit level, then it's going to affect this whole thing, the tracking force, which is, it doesn't help. And then this is another one. I think this is made by Dr. Fikert, or sold by him anyway, or he makes it, I doubt it somehow. But this has got sort of fractions of degrees. It's a very, very accurate spirit level. I kind of mainly use this for checking azimuth, to be perfectly honest, and the turntable level itself. But a combination of all these things are what you need for not so much setting the VTA, but getting in the rough area. And then, really and honestly, what you need to do is do it by ear. And that's what I'm going to talk about. But the point is, once you've done that, then you want to measure it. And that's why I was saying I use this and these to kind of get my reference point before I wandered off into the new realms. Because obviously I knew I wanted to get it back to where it was before, because that's what most of my records sound best on. And it's also a point that, of course, all the Atlantic 75s I've heard up until this point, all the MoFi one steps, all the UHQRs, they're all significantly thicker than the regular vinyl by half a mil to a mil, I would say, thicker. Millimeter, that is, sorry, not a mil as in 1/1000th of an inch. Sorry, UK slang, we often call millimeters mils, but that's not helpful. But anyway, so without an arm that you can raise and lower accurately, repeatedly, the arm height, which you can do. I mean, Clear Audio makes something called a VTA adjuster, which I used to have with my previous tone arm, which was a Clear Audio Universal. And frankly, I'm thinking of going back to purely for this reason. But also, I've owned a Graham Phantom, which you can adjust, and it's got a little scale. I've owned an SME Series 5, which you can adjust. I don't believe that has a scale, so that's not quite so useful. Eminent Technology had one of those where you could adjust it during play, if I remember rightly, with a scale. And there are plenty of arms where you can. There are also plenty of arms where you can't. And in those instances, I'd urge you to consider quite carefully whether that's something that you want to do, is buy an arm where the arm height, i.e. and consequently the VTA, the Stylus Rake Angle, isn't adjustable. It's fine if you're using a spherical stylus because it means nothing, but if you're using an elliptical, and as that elliptical becomes more and more and more line contact and the line footprint is longer, my Kansui is a Shibata stylus, which is a very long line contact, so it really is quite critical. Having adjustable VTA is certainly useful, and it does allow you to ultimately get better performance. Now, back in the day when I did have adjustable VTA on my arm, when I had that Clear Audio Universal, I didn't change the VTA for every single record that I had. I pretty much settled on two kind of rough settings, and one was a sort of 50s, 60s, well, 60s, 70s vinyl kind of position, and then another position for sort of 80s kind of, very thin vinyl, and then more modern sort of 180 gram vinyl I would play on the the 1970s kind of 70s setting, and that really, well, I mean, basically I was lowering the back of the arm for the 80s vinyl, because we all know 80s vinyl, they're very, very thin, and really if the angle that the record is cut at, and this is called the cutting angle, assuming that is the same across all cutting lathes, and it isn't, okay, but it's pretty much there, but it does vary very slightly. And I know people who will adjust VTA for 1970s CBSs versus 19, I don't know, they've got tables and charts filed away in their head and do it for every record. And you can, if you've got an adjustable VTA on your arm, it is quite quick to dial it in if you can do it sort of like that. But getting your Allen keys out and your, calipers and all these measuring devices, and it's a long, tedious, incredibly tedious process. So basically, yeah. So to get back to the listening, what I wanted to do was I wanted to try and, first of all, just try and raise by about 1/3 of a millimetre. And that took 2 or 3 goes, and I got there. And this definitely sounded better. There is no question. And it wasn't exactly 1/3 of a millimetre. It was perhaps more like 1/2 a millimetre when I kind of got this dialed in. But as I say, it's not a hard and fast rule that, for instance, the tone arm should be flat or the head shell should be flat. If your cartridge is well designed, that would be an ideal. But anyway, having dialed this in specifically, the VTA on it, I got the space and I got the I removed the veiling from the top end, and basically everything. And it was a more hi-fi, higher quality version of the original sonically. That's what it sounded like, with one exception. It had that bigger bass. bass has just been EQ'd up. And if you go back to what I was saying about that kind of the nature of the music on this particular album, boom, ba-dum, ba-dum, boom, ba-dum, boom, ba-dum, doom, doom, ba-dum, boom. And it is a kind of an umpire-y kind of bass. And frankly, I just think when you increase it in its mass, in its quantity, it takes away the immediacy and the bounciness and the fun and the sheer joy of the song. And that's across the whole album. So, you know, that is my verdict on this. It doesn't sound bad. In fact, it sounds significantly better than the classic records. I think it sounds better than the Mo-Fi, although I'm doing that from memory. I haven't got a US original to compare it to, but I have got this very, very nice UK original. I mean, in essence, this is a really, 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 really nice sounding record. There is no question about that. But, you know, to be perfectly honest, I do still prefer the original. But it does... Well, it caused me to revisit the subject of vertical tracking angle. And it's something that I'd be very interested to know, you know, if you'd like to leave message, you know, something in a comment below, whether you bother changing VTA for different records. As I said, it was, you know, even when I had the ability, I you know, basically it would sit on, you know, for 90% of my records, it would just stay where it is, which is where it is now. I'd just lower it if I was playing a thin 1980s pressing, which can just sound so thin and nasty unless you do that. But I think with these 880, 200 gram records that are coming out these days, if I had an adjustable VTA tone arm, I think I would actually have a third position, like so. I'd have sort of a position for the more modern, you know, the fat pressings, if you like. Maybe sort of, you know, a third of a millimetre lower than that for my regular 60s, 70s pressings. And then, you know, maybe half a mil lower than that for the, you know, 1980s thin, you know, what I would say not very nice pressings, if you know what I mean. So that's, you know, that's a couple of things here. I know it's a bit maybe confusing, this, talking about VTA and everything else as alongside an album, but it caused me to do this, and I've had other conversations with other people about VTA recently, which I, you know, may come back on. But it's you know, for me, I think the point is, it's, you know, yes, this did sound better when I increased the VTA slightly, or increased the arm height. And, you know, so, you know, consequently I can hear that it's not absolutely snapped on with my current setting, if you like. But at the same time, you know, like the White Stripes, the you know, the John Coltrane's, the Genesis Atlantic 75s, the Mingus, they sound absolutely, utterly phenomenal. And I didn't adjust the VTA for them. So I think the real thing here is that bass quantity, and I think that's you know, that's just, you know, purely you know, subjective, artistic, creative judgment by Bernie back whenever he cut the plates. And I think, as I said at the beginning, I think the plates for this were cut for classic records back in the sort of early 2000s. So I think that's you know, that's at what point he did that and made that decision. If I'm wrong on that, then, you know, it's obviously a modern decision. But I would like to hear, I'd really like to hear this just mastered very slightly different with very, very slightly less bass. But it's not a bad sounding record, don't get me wrong. It just hasn't quite got that bounce and the immediacy of the original. Okay, on that note, I'll say thank you very much for watching, and if you're still with me at this point in the video, well done. And it would be really helpful if you can click the like button and subscribe. It helps the channel immensely. Okay, thanks very much indeed. Bye now. Bye.